Tell me, what can you teach me?
Table manners, for one thing. This is a plate. It contains food. This is a knife. It cuts the food. This is a glass.
Leave me!
Like it or not, you're going to learn what you've been ordered to learn.
Bridge to all decks. Welcome aboard Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mantz.
And I'm Steve Morrison. I can't decide whether or not I should have studied Greek mythology or maybe Shakespeare to prepare for this episode, but either way, I'm very, very excited to be here.
I'm very, very excited as well to talk about an episode that I've always liked, but one that I have not watched in a long time. I mean, like when I think about the episodes that I keep going back to, they're episodes that I love, and I love this one. And it's been many, many years, but we sure do have a lot to talk about with Elaan of Troyius. And we have a lot to talk about because we have a very, 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 very special guest. He is a noted Star Trek author, editor, archivist, host, consultant, and producer. He has been a fixture at Star Trek conventions for decades, and he still looks really, really young. I'm so jealous. He has been a columnist for many official Star Trek magazines over the years. He is the author of the must-have book, Star Trek: The Next Generation Companion, which is right on my bookshelf next to the Star Trek Compendium written by Alan Asherman. Those two books are right next to each other as they should be. He is the host of the Trek Files podcast for Roddenberry Entertainment, and he is an award winner from the Future Society of Central Oklahoma for their Speculative Fiction Hall of Fame. And he is the producer, writer, and director of the upcoming documentary that I cannot wait to see because I know a whole lot of history about this, The Con of Wrath. Welcome aboard Enterprise Incidents, Larry Nemechek.
Well, Scott and Steve, it's this is amazing. I'm going to say you and a lot of other people are waiting on that. It's a little behind schedule, but we're going to get the Con of Wrath done. But this is amazing. When you first told me you were going to do this show, and I said, fine, just make it different, which is what I always said, that I wouldn't do a podcast unless I could find something different. Because there's so many good ones out here.
Yeah.
But I just didn't want to just throw one more on the pile.
Well, you know, one question that I've always had for you, Larry, and I can't believe I've never actually asked you this question, but what was the Star Trek episode that fired your phasers?
You know, this is fuzzy because I always had this story where I credit my 9th grade science teacher who was aghast that I wasn't watching Star Trek after school. And she basically, it was the end of something else, but I remember her saying, "Oh, Larry, don't tell me you don't watch Star Trek." And I went home, and for some reason, my brain, it was on Saturday morning. You know, the animateds were on Saturday, and I watched them first to see if I would like it enough to. I have this vague memory because I didn't run the TV. My big brother did. And I remember Lost in Space being on when I was like a little kid. But I remember this show about a guy with pointed ears that was also a space show. And that's all I knew when it was on and I was a kid. But I remember flipping channels when we used to flip channels. And I, at one point, came across, and now I know what it was. Just for a minute, it was Kirk and Spock coming down a corridor, and then they would cut to the floaty, glowy ball of energy. It was from
Day of the Dove.
From Day of the Dove. But I didn't watch it. I just went, oh, that must be that show with the guy with the pointed ears. And I just kept flipping. But years later, she said that, but I can remember that specific moment. And it totally identifies what it was, but it wasn't like one specific show. I think it was watching the shows because this is me. It was watching them day by day by day. And then after a while, it was just the idea that the universe was so intact. It was so continuous. And, you know, when you're a kid, I was, well, like in junior high, but you know, the plots and the gee whiz and the geekiness and the optimism kind of grab you in. But I had one or two friends at school and we would talk about it a little bit. It would come up, but it wasn't like this thunderclap. It was a slow burn. And it was like when I'd be on vacation and I found the Making of Star Trek book. And I was like, oh my God, here's a whole book about Star Trek. And I read that. And then they were like reinforcing each other with the shows. And you would notice things on a slow burn long, because you could, 5 days a week. You went through a run in 3 months, and then they would start over. And it was like the second or third time, I'm like, wait a minute, why is Uhura wearing a gold dress twice and then she's not? Or why is Scotty's hair changing? Or why did Kirk's green wraparound? I mean, like, I'm noticing that stuff and little thing, you know.
That's one of the symptoms that you're one of us, you know.
Well, the other thing was, after I bought the making of, I was at a bookstore and I saw that I could get David Gerald's The World of Star Trek.
Right.
And maybe a photo novel.
Yes,
and
the photo
something
novels.
else. Yes, the photo. But I remember I bought 3 things at once in a B. Dalton's or something at the mall. And I will never forget. So I'm getting them on my own money. And the bookseller, the clerk goes, oh, yeah, we always try to keep all of our titles, our Star Trek stuff in for all you Trekkies out there. And I was like, oh, is that what I am now? Okay. But I mean, like, I have these memories of my friend Dean, who we weren't sci-fi geeks together, but he took me to what passed for a comic book nostalgia shop in Norman. And I walk in, and at the same time, it was the giant poster book with the McCoy full color shot with inside about all of his medical props. And it was the old Trek magazine, the semi-pro slick one that the guys that Walter G.B. Love and Walter Irwin did. And it had a color picture of McCoy. There were like 2 color picture McCoys that looked gorgeous. And he's probably in his smock or dress uniform. And one article about close-ups of the medical props that probably Doug wrote back in the day.
Doug Drexler.
And Doug Drexler. And I just was like, why did I just, it was like issue 6. And I remember finding Starlog #1 on vacation. And then I found that visit I found like starting with number 6. So it was like this slow burn of a lot of things. It wasn't like I was watching the show one day and went, oh, I've got to do that. And then at some point I'd start taking notes because you couldn't record and you couldn't do anything unless you had a Polaroid off the TV screen. I didn't have that. So it was like, take notes as stuff went by. So yeah, it was it was a slow addiction. It was
you're definitely in great company. And as we get into Elaan of Troyius, Steve Morris, how do you feel about Elaan of Troyius? How has it sort of like resonated with you over these years?
So this one, I don't think was ever really one of my favorites. I think and maybe it was growing up in a very, Marin County Bay Area liberal upbringing, that the treatment of her always kind of, even as a kid, rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. And so I always had mixed, there are things in it I really liked and things I didn't like so much. And then watching it as an adult, it continues to change and evolve in my perspective of this show. So I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
Absolutely. Larry, how about you? Like, what are your feelings? Just a short, like, sort of bullet point kind of feeling that you've had about Elaan of Troyius over these years.
It was not one that I had a problem with. It was just kind of in the vast middle. It wasn't a favorite at all. And even watching it now, when I watched it just for this, again, I was thinking how much it felt. Oh, sure. Oh, come on. Are you kidding? I had to be up on my toes because it had, like you said, it's been a long time since I put any attention on Elaan of Troyius. But it really struck me now with all these years of absorbing what we know now, how it's still, there was that time in 3rd season before Bob Justman burned out and quit. I mean, Fred Freiberger was running the show and Gene had stepped back, but there's a break in the 3rd season where before, Bob Justman quits and it's like everybody kind of slowly gives up, but it still has a 2nd season feel to it.
Agreed.
Like there's still some care and depth and detail, and it just feels like the caring of shooting and the shots and setting things up is still, the budget cuts and the depression, the inevitability of they're going to beat us into submission. It doesn't feel like it's quite got there yet.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, because in terms of its production order, the beginning of season 3 actually felt like an extension of season 2. Mm-hmm. For one thing, you have an episode like the one we're talking about today. Not only was it written by John Meredyth Lucas, but he directed it too. So you're talking about the showrunner from the latter part of season 2, who also wrote The Changeling, who directed The Ultimate Computer, and the first few episodes they shot for season 3 were actually really good. And Elaan of Troyius has it all. I was surprised during this rewatch, Steve, how much this episode has with action and suspense, jeopardy to the Enterprise. It has heart, it has humor, and definitely a lot of romance. And when I was a kid, the suggestive romance, which was more than suggestive between Kirk and Elaan, was like pretty high. But it's a bottle show, and like Stevie said, it's a cross between Helen of Troy and the Taming of the Shrew, and Anthony and Cleopatra, and My Fair Lady. Definitely borrows a lot of elements of Journey to Babel, but it makes it feel fresh. The first time we are seeing the Klingon battle cruiser, at least in production, because the Enterprise incident aired first,
It's like the first time you see the Klingon battle cruiser, it's Romulan, which
using Klingon design, which makes no sense. But when you watch it in production order, it makes a lot of sense. And this episode aired on December 20th, 1968. It was the 68th episode to air, so it aired deep into the third season, but it was actually the 58th episode to film, the second episode to film for season 3 between May 31st and June 10th, 1968. So it was filmed over 7 days. And Steve, I know that when we get into what was going on in the world during that week, we're going to have a lot to talk about with that. But the total cost of this episode was $180,483. So it's about $2,000 over budget. The score, composed by Fred Steiner, it was his 11th score, and the score was recorded on July 12th, 1968. So this all started as a story idea from Gene Roddenberry as a script for season 2. And then John Meredyth Lucas did his outline. Fred Freiberger revised it. Lucas came in and did a second draft teleplay. Arthur Singer, the new story consultant, rewrote it. Freiberger did a script polish dated May 27th. And that brings us to the pre-production on Elaan of Troyius.
So, Scott, as you said, there was a lot going on in the world that week. And, one thing, we have to remember is that just a week ago in our previous episode, we talked about the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. His death was announced in a very famous speech by Robert Kennedy at a campaign event, and that you can listen to the audio. It's a very powerful, very brief and moving moment. And now we're moving into the week of, May 31st through June 10th. The first thing, and this is not an important story, but it resonates so much with what's happening today, which is that on June 1st, Austria became the first European nation to purchase natural gas from the Soviet Union. And that is something, a political and economic decision that is critical to world events going on right now with what's happening in Ukraine. On June 3rd, we talked about the attempt, the assassination of Martin Luther King. There was an attempted assassination on Andy Warhol. Valerie Solanas attempted to kill him outside of the factory on June 3rd. On June 4th, the S&P 500 closed over 100 for the first time in history. Today it closed well over 4,000.
So is it up or down?
It's pretty far up. I think if you had invested just in a nice index fund in the S&P in 1968, you'd have done pretty good.
And let it sit. Don't touch it.
Don't touch it. And of course, this is now June 4th. It is the day of the California primary, which is strange because today is the day, as we're recording this, of a primary in the state of California. And unsurprisingly, Robert Kennedy defeated Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota to win the California primary. He's at the Ambassador Hotel. And I want to bring up another story we talked about on Enterprise Incidents way back when we discussed the Galileo 7 on September 24th, 1966. We told the story of a jockey riding a horse who was thrown from his horse, got a head injury, and people talked about the fact that he became paranoid, angry, and violent after that accident. And that man is in the basement of the Ambassador Hotel. He is in the kitchen, and as Robert Kennedy, after winning the primary, goes down through there, that man, Sirhan, shoots Robert Kennedy in the head, injures 5 other people, and after many hours of surgery, Kennedy died, having never regained consciousness.
On June 5th, 1968, that was the 4th day of filming on Elaan of Troyius. So many of the cast members and crew members didn't find out that Kennedy was shot until they got to the set. And Larry, I believe that our guest actress on Elaan of Troyius, she was very, very much a big supporter of Bobby Kennedy. And she was in complete shock when she heard the news, and she has to film all these scenes, including the scene where Elan throws a knife at Kirk.
This is the kind of drilling down that I love, the way you guys are doing it, because we do it in small doses on the Trek Files, but it was a tumultuous, all of 1968 was crazy. Now, on the other hand, we talk about this week they're filming. By the time it airs in December, the one thing that kind of tried to redeem 1968 was Apollo 8 getting to the moon and giving everybody a chance to breathe a little. I mean, it was almost like a script.
Yeah.
And, the famous shot of Earthrise and reading from Genesis at the, but that's when it aired. So it's almost like this episode kind of, bookmarks.
Yeah, bookends the whole year.
Time and maybe a little calmer time. But no, it was Bobby Kennedy. We say, he won the California primary. The thing was, he beat Eugene McCarthy, who started off trying to be the anti-war candidate, to Johnson. And by this time, LBJ had given it up, that there was so much anti-Johnson sentiment. He didn't want to split the party. And he'd already announced delaying the Smothers Brothers, I think, because I've got a recording of it somewhere. But he went on and shocked everybody and said he would not seek re-election, which he could, because he'd served enough of a short term after Kennedy's assassination that he was still eligible to have another 4-year term. And he said he wouldn't, which threw it wide open. And who would do it? And here's Bobby Kennedy kind of coming out of nowhere and doing this last minute surge. And in those days, it wasn't so much about delegates and primaries. It was the convention was really going to choose somebody. And the fact that he was shot and killed that night, right when he was having all the momentum and everybody expected him to take California and the other states he'd won and wind up having the nomination.
Right.
Well,
right.
And of course, we never know what could have happened in history, but there's a lot of evidence that if the election was held, at least at that moment, the main election, that Kennedy would have beaten Nixon.
Oh, yes.
That he would have probably been the next president of the United States, which means the entire history of the world is different.
Talk about a what-if moment for sci-fi writers to go back.
Yeah.
They love to go back to the JFK assassination, but yeah, because there were so many people that and Bobby Kennedy, not to get off on this too long, but he had been such an FBI law and order guy going after
organized crime and
whatever. He was such a straight arrow, but he really kind of bloomed, especially after his brother was killed. And he really sat down and went out and looked at the people. And he really was a man of the people, and people responded to that, as I'm sure France Nuyen, with her Asian heritage background and working in the States, and many, many people saw Bobby as somebody who was, what Star Trek was all about, the diversity.
Exactly.
Which was still a new thing in the 60s. And the fact that we wound up with just kind of, yay Humphrey, but we wound up with more on the shelf, off the shelf standard candidates. And people wanted to see maybe his brother's legacy fulfilled through Bobby was part of that emotion too.
Sure.
Which was why the double assassination was even more terrible on people's psyche. It's amazing we limped out of 1968 at all.
It's great. 1968 was a crazy year. So he was shot on June 5th, but he actually died 25 hours later on June 6th. And on the day that Bobby Kennedy was pronounced dead, on the set of Star Trek, they were filming on Stage 9. They filmed the love scenes between Kirk and Elan. Then they crushed it,
Well, and this is the thing, there's the expression, the show must go on. That's not a joke, actually. There are a lot, getting up onto a stage in front of a camera and having to play all sorts of things when you're just absolutely wrecked inside. It's not easy, but the show actually must go on most of the time. And so you go and do your job.
And you peg Star Trek, especially because there's so much of a fan base where we do this, but we study these episodes. That, for good and bad, like after 9/11, during the LA riots in the early 90s, the Rodney King riots and after, there are moments when I've seen Bob Justman talk about, they wondered about filming at Desilu during the Watts riots.
The Watts riots.
Yeah. There's moments when you can't, you want to act from where you are and or it's a personal tragedy, like when Shatner talked about his dad dying and
Devil in the Dark.
He said, no, I'll finish out the day.
Unbelievable.
And, all of that kind of thing. So it's personal or it's social. It's you put on the costume, put on the makeup and get out there and go. And people try to cut you some, but when it's everybody going through the same upheaval, it's it's amazing. So, and and then you get some distance. You get 10 or 20 or 30 years, and you look back, and maybe you detect a little bit of a tone shift. It's like Enterprise was all filmed. The first season was mostly filmed before 9/11, but it aired after,
and afterwards,
that tone kind of caught up in succeeding years. But yeah, anyway, it's a good moment to remember this is all going on in 60. So France Nuyen being a supporter of Bobby Kennedy doesn't surprise me at all, because a lot of younger people, a lot of people in entertainment were of that same mindset. And the more global your outlook was, I'm sure the more they were in line with Bobby, with RFK.
Well, as they say, the show must go on.
So I think we have to shoulder that burden as well and move right into the show. We open in the teaser. We hear we're in this diplomatic mission. And already right at the beginning, you get the sense that Kirk is not all that pleased about this particular one.
Some desk-bound Starfleet bureaucrat cut these cloak and dagger orders.
Aye, but why the secrecy?
And we hear that it's a border area, that we're near the Klingons. I should say that we're talking about these two planets, Troyius and Elas, and we get a hail from Elas. They're ready to beam aboard, and they demand an explanation for the delay.
And Kirk is already going, demand? What delay? All right, beam them aboard.
And we hear two other things. One is we hear that scientists who conducted an investigation on Elas described them as vicious and arrogant. And then McCoy, always a little bit lascivious, says,
now, the women, they're supposed to be something very special. They're supposed to have a kind of a subtle, mystical power that drives men wild.
I want to say he's being sarcastic there, because it's somewhere between the subject matter and just the fact that it's one more way to get at Spock, right?
Yep,
to get under his skin a little bit. What struck me about rewatching this again was I had forgotten that the whole thing was couched as a top secret mission.
Right.
So what's the story? Is that to cut them off from external communication? Or was that meant to heighten the sense that they're really on their own? We just did Enterprise. It's not Enterprise incidents level. Excuse me. It's not the Enterprise incident level. Let me correct that. It's not quite up to that Pueblo incident level, but it threw me to rewatch again and realize that they were making such a big deal about it being a secret mission again. Like Enterprise has turned into, the covert ship of the year or something here.
I frankly think the secret mission thing was a thing they threw on to add tension, because it doesn't really make any sense that the marriage between the leaders of two planets, this is not a secret, Do
they have subspace radio? Then it's not going to be much of a secret.
By the way, what I'm reminded of with McCoy and his little moment there is Wolf in the Fold, where it's, I know a place where the women are I know the place.
Oh, yes, I know the place.
Yeah. And we're in the transporter room, and we beam over these three huge guys who immediately draw their weapons. And we also meet Ambassador Petrie from Troyius.
Okay, Ambassador Petrie is played by Jay Robinson, who on TV was in shows like Bewitched, Mannix, The Waltons, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. On film, he had a very storied career in earlier films like The Robe. He was in the Warren Beatty classic Shampoo. He was in Big Top Pee-wee and Bram Stoker's Dracula. But you know where I remember Jay Robinson? From Sid and Marty Krofft's Dr. Shrinker. Remember Dr. Shrinker?
Of course. Is he Dr. Shrinker?
Yes, he's Dr. Shrinker.
Wow.
You guys had me on this one, so okay. I don't.
And also you meet Crichton, who's played by Tony Young, who on TV was the gunslinger. He was in Iron Horse, The Virginian, and Mannix. And on film, he was in films like He Rides Tall and Taggart.
There's obviously a reaction, right away to the fact that these guys have their weapons out.
Yep.
And they have a reaction to the fact that there's a Troyan on board, and they say,
I must know that all is secure before the Dolman is brought on board.
What the devil's a Dolman?
This ship is secure, and we're prepared for any hostile acts.
What I like about the way Shatner delivers that line is that we're prepared for any hostile acts isn't just about Troyans or protecting the Dolman. It's very clearly directed at the dude that's got his weapon drawn on his transporter platform.
Yeah, and the other thing about that, too, is that Kirk has already been down this road, having delegates aboard the Enterprise and transferring them from one planet to another. in Journey to Babel.
There's a tiny element to me, aside from Journey to Babel, now that I'm thinking about this, is there's not a straw dog like Niles Barris, but there's a little bit of like, we're escorting, he gets into it eventually. We're escorting a bride to a wedding. Like, what's the big deal? It's almost like we're taking wheat to Sherman's planet. What's the big deal?
What's the big
And
sweet
here's
slut?
Klingons coming in to complicate things. Like,
That's
really?
a good point. Yeah.
We're escort duty here, guys. Really? Now he doesn't have a Niles Barris to push back on from, the Federation or whoever's made this a top secret thing. But he instantly
Petrie
gets
comes
sucked into the
close.
thing. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Petrie is kind of like the stand-in, but it's like he's been sucked into the Klingons complicating something that should be simple, and now it's got that dual level of he's got the local drama, but he's got, as they point out to him, oh yes, but your superiors won't be happy if you screw this up, which is what happened with Barris.
That's a great point. And B, I think you immediately see Kirk not being really into this particular gig and not respecting it, because in the next moment we say energize, and all the guys from Elas, they kneel, and then a moment later Ambassador Petrie kneels, and then Kirk and his guys, they stay standing. And here's the first thing I'll say about this is that throughout the history of negotiating with other cultures, you find out about the other culture before you meet them. I mean, you go back 1,000 years and they're finding out, oh, when you're in the presence of this person, this is their traditions, this is what they do. Kirk, they know nothing, and they're being immediately disrespectful without even they know nothing at this moment. And so then there is the transporter, and there on the transporter platform, we get our first glimpse of the Dolman.
A long, lingering, panning glimpse.
Yeah, well, okay, so there's a couple things. First, Steve, you make an excellent point. It always struck me that Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty were being disrespectful. And the point you make about learning about the cultures before you really get into some kind of interaction with them. Look at the way McCoy knew so much about the Capellans.
Exactly.
Back in Friday's Child, like he's like, don't disrespect them. We come with open hearts and hands. Like he knew it, and they went into this ill-informed, showing disrespect. And what I like about the way that the Dohlman of Elas beams aboard the Enterprise, like it's like a slow build. You hear the transporter, and then you see her slowly beam aboard, and there's that pan from bottom to top. And then that shot of her standing on the transporter platform with that gorgeous wardrobe designed by Bill Tice. So Elaan, the Dohlman of Elas, played by France Nuyen, who we mentioned already, she is born of Vietnamese and French ancestry. And what's interesting, I didn't know until I was doing my homework on it, she was previously married to Robert Culp, who was the star of I Spy, which was running around the same time as Star Trek, and also, of course, The Greatest American Hero. She is a 1959 Golden Globe nominee, most promising newcomer for South Pacific. She co-starred with William Shatner in the late 50s on Broadway in The World of Susie Wong. On TV, she was on Gunsmoke, I Spy, Hawaii Five-0, St. Elsewhere, Knots Landing. On film, she was in Satan Never Sleeps, A Girl Named Tamiko, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and the Joy Luck Club, and yet she is mostly remembered for being the Dohlman of Elas in Elaan of Troyius.
I always think of World of Susie Long second. If that was stage, and obviously there's probably no recordings, whatever. But I always thought it was cool that if there's anything to a jumpstart chemistry between the two of them in this episode, it's how many nights did they play together? Opposite each
about
other.
A year. They played together for about a year.
Sure. So that was great that they had somebody come in built-in chemistry like that.
For sure. That definitely helps.
Or they might have hated each other. Who knows? Being on a show with someone for a year sometimes isn't the best thing in the world.
It could be, yeah.
But after she appears, Kirk and his crew reluctantly, very clearly reluctantly, I think, do kneel. And this is one of the other things is like, both them and Ambassador Petrie are not good at hiding their feelings or their disdain for the people from Elas.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But that is the end. That is the end of our teaser.
The title, Elaan of Troyius, was originally titled back in the late '66 when Roddenberry came up with the idea. It was called Helen of Troyius, and it was definitely on the nose. So it was Fred Freiberger who suggested the name change, and then it became more alien-like for Elaan of Troyius.
You rule this ship?
I am the first officer. This is Captain James Kirk.
And then Petrie comes in and tries to do his ambassador stuff. He very clearly does not like his job.
Right.
You know,
he doesn't like her either,
which isn't really very good for an ambassador. You know, ambassadors should be able to kind of hold their feelings in check a little bit.
Ambassador, if I might speak to you.
You have not been dismissed.
May I have your permission to go?
You are now dismissed.
And by the way, Steve, that is the last time Kirk is going to ask for any kind of permission from the Dohlman of Elas. Now I'm curious, Larry. So in season 2, during the Gene Kuhn period, that peak period of the original series, obviously there was a lot of humor, especially in episodes like The Tribbles and I, Mud, and A Piece of the Action. Now, when they got to season 3 and Roddenberry briefly took control of the show again, he's like, no humor. That's not, I don't want any chumming around on the Enterprise and stuff like that. But don't you think that Shatner is tapping into his comedy for this episode a little bit?
Well, you have to, if it's going to be, I mean, I think it was great when it started off as Gene's idea of Helen of Troy. And it's okay. It's like, what is it? Some old, 50s B movie, George Rhodes or whatever reason. But making it a Taming of the Shrew, that level, because Taming of the Shrew is a comedy, and it's a comedy of, it's a battle of the sexes kind of a comedy. And that, if that's going to be the tone laid onto the historical Helen of Troy bit, you have to have a bit of comedy. And I just want to say that I think sometimes this whole thing about Gene pushing back against the comedy may be a little overblown. I think part of Gene Kuhn's reason for leaving was just by this time exhaustion. I mean, he dies, 6-7 years later of this lung cancer. He's smoking like a chimney. And he keeps writing for the show. He's on good terms. He's got a deal for several episodes as Lee Cronin, and he can't let you. To me, it's amazing how they think that they're fooling Universal. He has an exclusive contract at Universal. So he's going to write these episodes as Lee Cronin, and no one's going to find out, which is hysterical.
Yeah.
Not in the internet age. But anyway, I just want to say that because this episode is obviously, if you're going to call it Taming of the Shrew, you've got to have that kind of byplay, and you've got to kind of have that. And even people that, I mean, over the years, we've gone back, and I hope we talk about this more. Kirk's, the overall look of James T. Kirk as the years have gone by. Thing about being a womanizer. He's totally doing his mission here. They come up with the MacGuffin of the Elasian tears, but he goes into this not caring. It is comic. And then he can treat her with a comic distance. And it's like comic violence versus real violence. It's like comic book, it's vamping. It's banter.
There's a rhythm. There's a dance to it. There's definitely a volley between France and Shatner.
And she is a petulant child, and he's dealing with that, and he's having to be the diplomat and know there's real world stakes, as Petrie keeps reminding about. I think I've had nothing but watching this again after years. I'm very respectful of how they actually, in the 3rd season, at this point, played all those things, and even with modern eyes watching it, I think all those scenes played well until things take a turn when she starts crying. But up in front here, I think it's and the tables turned on him, and they should have had a better cultural briefing. Yes, maybe that's why it was a top secret mission. It was so secret we couldn't brief you in advance.
I think that might be part of it. Something just popped into my brain because of what you said, Larry, which is this idea of Kirk the womanizer, and I never put it together quite this way before, because that's the myth. And having now gone through this show episode by episode,
I think that's a last 10, 20 years myth. Yeah.
There are certainly all sorts of women that are into Kirk, but the number of times he's actually going after women is really, really small. And later on, because with Will Riker in Next Generation, they decide, we want to give him Kirk's womanizer, that piece of this personality. And so what happens with Will Riker, and it's really terrible, particularly for the first several seasons, of any time he sees a hot woman, he's going to go after her. And it becomes this sort of weird, like kind of creepy thing. Or Dr. Bashir later in Deep Space Nine, it's like they're going, it worked with Kirk being a womanizer, except the thing was, he never really was. That's not who Kirk is. And so they made this mistake in the later shows trying to emulate a thing that never really existed. you know?
Wow, that's really, really a great point.
I mean, yes, that's what got me. If you go, I mean, as we, the years go by and we see the older shows with new eyes, and then another 10, 20 years later go by and you're seeing it with revised eyes. But this thing about him being a quote unquote womanizer, if he was, he kissed lots of women, but how much of it was mission specific? How much of it was he was playing the secret agent, the diplomat, or he was thrown into a situation where Edith Keeler and Miramani under false pretenses, loss of memory. And then,
from a Requiem for Methuselah.
Yeah.
Which is an episode I don't even like, so I never counted.
I know. It's, to me, it's like, they did that show going out the door. They were like almost in the last week.
Of those, Requiem for Methuselah is the only one where it's Kirk kind of going after someone. The other ones are he was thrown into a situation and fell in love,
For sure.
That's not being a womanizer.
Right. But everything else, we think if you got the clip of him kissing somebody, it was always he's serving the mission, and that's just one of his tools in the toolbox. Not to, maybe I shouldn't have said the word tool, but okay.
That creature, Elaan, is to be the wife of our ruler, to bring peace. Our two warring planets now possess the capability of mutual destruction. Some method of coexistence must be found.
I think there was a pathway that they sort of almost approached going down, but then they chose not to. And that is the pathway of both of these sides are messed up, with Petri being messed up and Elaan being messed up. And clearly from his description of her as a creature, like that's pretty
harsh,
pretty terrible. And I don't think we feel particularly good about Ambassador Petri, but they don't really pursue it. You know what I mean? Like had they pursued that, I think this would have been a better episode.
At least he's not trying to stab her and he doesn't have a groom squad.
Right. So Kirk's like, okay, so we're heading off to Troyius. And I like the ambassador says,
yes, but slowly, Captain. I will need time. Before we reach there, she must be taught civilized manners.
And that's Petri's job. He is going to teach her manners.
And the failure of this mission will be catastrophic for Federation planning. I'm not sure what that means, but it's a good line that was written in. I don't know if it was Lucas or Freiberger or Singer who wrote it, but just to kind of pump up the suspense and up the stakes.
I'm cool with that because if you go like, well, look, India and Pakistan have had a conflict throughout history. They're both nuclear powers. If they were to go to war, that would mess up the whole world.
Well, that's true too.
Economically, socially, and environmentally, it would be a really, really big deal.
And they're straddling the world right there at Russia and China.
I must ask you and your crew to respect, or at least tolerate their arrogance.
And so they're being framed as a really horrible people. That's kind of how we're talking about them.
Laying a course for Troyius. Mr. Sulu, impulse drive. Speed factor, 0.03 seconds.
Impulse drive, Captain.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Sulu. Sublight factor, 0.037.
I wanted Sulu to turn and go, I can't go 0.036? And Kirk said, no, 0.037. That's a total side issue. Like, that was a big thing.
And then, Scotty comes over and says...
all the way on impulse? That'll take a great deal of time.
You in a hurry, Mr. Scott?
And I love Scotty's reaction. He's like,
no.
He just walks away. By the way, Larry, Steve and I have repeatedly said, almost episode by episode, how much the performance of James Doohan and the character of Scotty has not gotten the credit that it deserves. Scotty is a great character. He's had so many great moments. Jimmy Doohan just gave a fantastic performance. And he was in more episodes of season 3 than he was in the first 2 seasons, each one of the first 2 seasons. And I think Jimmy is awesome.
Well, he is. I almost feel like the realization that Dee was awesome, which kind of only took a season to catch up with, and they elevated him right above the line in the opening titles. I think that was Jimmy as well, but he was on a slower burn. And talk about a long-term arc to things. I mean, people, when they're making the shows and they're looking at contracts and what days are you working and how much you're getting paid a day and all that. And same thing with Nichelle and George and then Walter. But Jimmy, right after that, they all brought some. They were given so little to do. They did so much with the little crumbs they were thrown, unless it was a spotlight show. And if the show had gone on another 4th season, maybe Jimmy would have been. You would have thought Jimmy would have been bumped up the way Dee was. The way
I'll
shows
bet
grow.
you in a parallel universe, when Star Trek ran for 4 seasons, that in season 4 it said starring William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and James Doohan as Scotty.
I certainly hope that would be the case, but I'm thinking about shows of that era, and you think about Perry Mason, and there was Della and the detective and Perry, and Warren in Berger, the district attorney. No one else popped up. You know what I mean? Hop Singh didn't get a bigger role on Bonanza, or Sheriff Cody, whatever the sheriff's name was, as the seasons went on. It was pretty locked in on most of those shows. So I would hope that that's exactly what would happen, but I don't know that it would have.
Star Trek did evolve far afield from what,
absolutely
initial little boxy description of, not horrendously, but I think the scope. And I don't know that I really wonder sometimes when they started off, if they really realized what they were getting. I'm just thinking this top of my head just now. We talk about, it was all, the believability factor was baked in the cake right off the bat, and all their infamous memos back and forth about, Spock, Vulcan names and the ships in the fleet and all that. But I think it was this vague notion that they wanted a continuity because they were worried about doing science fiction in the 60s on TV and what a bad rep it had, or no rep at all. And he wanted to do serious, the shows that I got canceled for on The Lieutenant and elsewhere. I want to do serious message shows, even if we have to have the purple and the green people do it with ray guns. And I don't really know if they realized that they were going to, create the industry of tech manuals and blueprints and cultural guides and cosplay.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know that they realized that to the extreme it was going to go, because every year it went on. I mean, they themselves had to keep up with their own in-house, writer's guide and Bible and all that. And I wonder at the very beginning if they had any idea, he and Dorothy had any idea what they were going to get into by this time. But that's a case of where I don't think at the beginning, they were just trying to get a show out and do stories.
Yeah.
But this sidebar thing they just assumed was going to happen led to its whole, different slice of the pie for Star Trek.
Absolutely. Yep.
One thing I love that happens on the bridge is, as we're going on our very slow course to Troyius, we get a word that the Dolman is not happy with her quarters. And I love Uhura standing up and going, "What's wrong with the quarters?" Because it's her quarters that she kindly gave up for it, and she is offended.
Yeah, she should be.
And now we cut down to those quarters, and we see, I will say, Ambassador Petrie doing an absolutely terrible job of pretending to be nice, and the Dolman is
diplomatic,
incredibly rude about the gifts of shoes and jewels and the wedding dress, and it is not going well at all when Kirk enters.
Yeah, Petrie is definitely losing his patience.
But comedy rule of three: dress, shoes, and then this. Of course, the stones. We wind up coming back to circle back
that's
to.
Right. That's true.
Yeah,
that's very true.
This is the most prized of royal jewels for your lovely neck.
But then Kirk comes in. He comes in, and just like he was in the transporter room, I like that approach you took with Trouble with Tribbles and Niels Barris. Larry, he's kind of going there a little bit, and he's definitely not taking this very seriously. He's not taking the Dolman very seriously, and he's kind of nudging back at her, and that is just going to escalate, of course.
My communications officer generously vacated the rooms, hoping you would find it satisfactory.
I do not find them so, and I find him even less satisfactory. Must my bitterness be compounded with that ridiculous ambassador aboard your ship?
How do you feel? Do you feel any sympathy for Elaan?
Not yet. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Lieutenant Uhura for being the first character in Star Trek to take advantage of the Airbnb. She's like, I don't know, you can trash it all you want. I'm just going to refurnish it anyway. But to answer your question, Steve, no, I don't like her at this point.
I didn't
not even a little.
Her. I didn't ask if you liked her. I asked if you had any sympathy for her.
Okay, that is a great point. That is an absolutely great point, because liking someone and having sympathy for them are two totally different things. And I'm still going to answer, no, I don't have sympathy for her yet.
Well, what about you, Larry?
It struck me. You're not meant to have sympathy with her, but
no, you're not. I agree.
Me, or like her at this point. But it did strike me. She has one or two lines. And again, this is my adult eyes watching this, not my 15-year-old eyes. She does have a moment where she talks about just being a pawn, and she can't believe, like her dad or her people, her governor, the rulers. She had no power back on, they threw her in the transporter to make her do this.
Yeah, that's true.
But now she's got her own power, and she's throwing these tantrums, and she's throwing her weight around because she finally feels like she's in a place where she can. This all just rushed at me watching last night.
Yeah.
But she does have a line or two to try to get it across that as bitchy as she's acting here, she sees herself as a victim. She didn't ask for this. She didn't want to be, we're celebrating Elizabeth's Jubilee. Those princesses, when, her father died soon and her life at 25, she was thrown onto being on the, you give up your personal life. They talk about ending the monarchy in the UK, but you give up your life to be a public person and rarely get any privacy. And that's what she's facing here. She didn't ask to be married off to some idiot.
Yeah, you're right.
That she didn't know, hadn't met. Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking about watching it this time. I was the same as you as a kid. I wasn't thinking about this, but now I'm going like, okay, she's some kind of princess in her world, or queen, or someone who has lived a very privileged lifestyle within a very specific culture. Like, I don't think her behavior in her culture is aberrant behavior. She's behaving
warriors,
how she's
right.
Yeah, this is how you're supposed to behave. And she is being forced into an arranged marriage against her will with a culture that is totally alien and opposite to her. And she has been treated essentially, because I could see through Petrie's behavior that he hates her and is dismissive, and she's been treated with total disrespect. And even if she's been put in a room that's filled with Troyan stuff, they didn't think anything about her culture or what she would actually like to live in. So I actually I don't like her. She's not a likable character. But watching it this time, I was like, yeah, she's actually in a messed up situation.
Yeah, there's a modicum of respect you can have here for. I mean, it really is like a Athens and Sparta kind of a thing. They're the Spartan warriors, and Petrie and the Trojans are like the snooty. Well, we're so superior to you. And now you're trying to bridge that gap.
One thing that I did think about watching this episode for the first time, and I mean, literally, it has been years, where we're only seeing and learning about the Elasian culture through the experiences of our Enterprise crew and their interactions with the Dolman and with her guards, and everything that we're hearing and seeing. So it got me thinking, like, I hear your points about the Dolman being sympathetic. And now that you put it that way, yeah, I could totally sympathize with that a little bit. Yeah. But what it got me thinking about is, like, in the eyes of their culture, and Steve, we talked about this on other episodes, in the eyes of that culture, this is totally normal. And the way that the Klingons are depicted in the Next Generation, okay, not in the original series. I had the
same thought, Scott. Yes, go on.
Of course you did, Steve Morris. So I thought, wow, there are some very interesting similarities from what little we know about the Elasians to the way that the Klingons were depicted in Star Trek: The Next Generation, especially when Ronald D. Moore came on board and really delved into the Klingon culture and made them fully realized. And yes, they are different and they have their ways, the way of the warrior, but it is their culture and it is to be respected. And I don't think that Kirk and the Enterprise crew, or even just the 23rd Century Federation, is there yet.
So first of all, that is exactly the same thought I had, Scott. And I know we're going slow, so we'll have to pick up the pace a little bit. But your statement, Larry, about Athens and Sparta really hit with me, because I suddenly went, well, what if we took like one of the most perfectly well-researched, historically accurate versions of Sparta ever, obviously the movie 300, which is, pristinely accurate. And you took one of those dudes and you put him in Uhura's quarters and told him what kind of shoes he had to wear, what dress he had to wear, and what necklace he had to wear before he got married, he'd probably be pretty pissed off, Like he would not feel that this was good, that if they're Spartan warriors, this is not how you should be treating them.
I will never forgive the consul for putting me through this torture.
There you go. And can you just say really quick, there may be a culture shock going on here because I know it's original series and it was a little loosey-goosey about the Prime Directive and the way the Prime Directive was interpreted later. But here's basically the whole talk also, can I just say, the whole thing about going to warp and not going to warp, we're talking about two planets in the same star system. This is like Earth and Mars. Right. This is like Neptune
I
and
thought
Venus
about that.
Or something. And so it makes sense to go at impulse. You're not supposed to be at warp because what if you smack into a planet or the SAR? I mean, if you go to warp, you don't have a lot of elbow room, right? That's the whole point, unless you're pointing outward. And they're not. They're going from planet to planet. These are two planets that the whole point it's on the radar is because he says they have just recently, they've got atomic weapons, they've got interplanetary missiles that they can reach each other across orbit. So now they're a threat to each other, like Aminiar and Vendikar.
Right.
And so now, they've been they've been there for 800 years, whatever it was.
Yeah.
These are two planets that have just recent. So if you're looking at the Troyans, the Elasians, if you're looking at them running around in there, and by the way, that armor that they're wearing, is plastic placemats. Thank you, Bill. If they're running around, with sandals and armor and all of these old, these medieval Bronze Age kind of accoutrements, and Petri and his people are a little further along, but they've just recently crossed over that threshold. And why, aside from it being on the Klingon border and they're right for Klingon interference, like Neural was, like some of these other underdeveloped planets that the Federation is forced to pay attention to, at least the fact that they are aware of others. If they don't have their own warp drive, maybe they're at least aware of others because they've already been corrupted or visited by Klingons or whatever. So, it's a weird spot because they're obviously less developed planets. Maybe you'd think below the threshold of Prime Directive.
But they're part of the Federation. They say that at the beginning. They're part of the Federation. So obviously we've moved past the Prime Directive at some point recently.
It's interesting they're part of the Federation, but they're not. They're at war with each other, so it's not like they're in as a joint member. But it's just or maybe it's just within Federation. I don't know. That's another loosey-goosey original series thing. But
this marriage,
but these cultures have just recently gotten onto the place where now they've got, the toys they have. Somebody gave them shotguns, not slingshots.
Were you responding to my demand for better quarters?
There are none better. I suggest you make do with these.
You suggest?
There are no more available, but if that's the only way you can get gratification, I'll arrange to have the whole room filled from floor to ceiling with breakable objects.
Shatner is hilarious.
The framing of this is that she is a spoiled brat, and he treats her as a spoiled brat, and you know what? She is.
I will not be humiliated.
Then act in a civilized fashion.
I did not give you permission to leave.
I didn't ask for any.
So I have two completely contradictory feelings about this. Feeling number one, way to go, Kirk. He handled her great. Feeling number two, if you were going to meet a king or a queen or the Pope or the President of the United States, there's a whole bunch of rules you're supposed to follow around those people, and she is used to those rules being followed, and Kirk doesn't care at all about that.
Yeah, he doesn't respect the rules, and he doesn't respect their culture.
Can I just say that I thought gratification and breakaway objects was awesome dialogue writing for 1968. Can I just say that? Okay.
Yeah. Please. Outside, Petri is done.
I wish to contact my government. I cannot fulfill my mission. It would be an insult to our ruler to bring this incorrigible monster as a bride.
And now Kirk is trying to shut down Petri. And this is that sort of parallel thing that they sort of dance with, but don't really go into detail.
There cannot be peace between us. We have deluded ourselves. Captain, when I am near them, I do not want peace. I want to kill them.
You're as bad as she is. It's not required that you like each other. Just do your jobs.
It's a job.
And this is one of the key themes of the show, which is your desires versus your duty. Duty is a key theme to this episode.
Absolutely, it is. And even Kirk says that later in the episode that he has a duty even after he's been affected by you know what.
But if she won't listen to
Then
me...
make her listen, Ambassador. Use a different approach. Stop being so diplomatic. She respects strength. Go in strong.
We know where this episode's going, by the way. I think later on the bridge, we hear that there is a censor ghost. Been a lot of censor ghosts in the course of Star Trek.
Yep.
The Enterprise has been a censor ghost itself in Balance of Terror, and now we have another one. Seeing them intermittently, we don't quite know what it is.
And what does that sound like? Didn't we just have that experience on Journey to Babel?
Yep.
We did.
And while this is going on, we hear from engineering that the Elasians are down in engineering.
Scotty does not like anybody messing with his controls.
And down in engineering, we see one of the red guys explaining something to Elaan, and she is not interested in engines. She is interested in weapons.
So that red shirt explaining the engineering to Elaan is Watson, played by Victor Brandt. And I bring his name up because you'll kind of see him again as one of the space hippies in The Way to Eden.
With the ball cap.
Oh.
Yes, with the ball cap.
I wish you had told me that you wanted a tour of the engineering department.
Do we not have the freedom of this ship? We have granted your crew the permission not to kneel in our presence. What else do you want?
I like the way that she says that. Okay, France Nuyen, she's like, what? We gave your crew permission to not kneel in our presence. Like, what more do you want? You know,
which again, that's probably a really big deal.
Yeah,
like
right.
Has she ever given anyone permission not to kneel in her presence? She's had people kneel in her presence her entire life. This is a huge sacrifice she's made.
So I just want to say at this point, so France Nuyen in this episode, Larry, throughout the course of this episode, she goes through quite the arc. Yes. She goes from being the Shrew to being someone who is very sympathetic and affectionate to a tragic figure by the end of this episode. And I was thinking, and I know I bring this episode a lot because it's one of my favorites, but there was another episode where the female, a guest star, went through a really great dramatic arc for an actor. And that's, of course, Eleanor Donahue in Metamorphosis. Mm-hmm. But I think France Nuyen in Elaan of Troyius doesn't get the sort of credit she should get for giving a fully realized, amazing performance where she starts off the episode one way and goes through a remarkable transformation by the end.
Watching this now of a piece, these phases, you enjoy the comedy, the Taming of the Shrew comedy at the beginning. And that's, and you can't have that sustain. You've got to have an arc. It can't be one note all the way through. And at the end, you get those glimmers again where she's the pawn in this and you try to feel some sympathy. She's so strong on throwing her breakable objects, though, and stabbing ambassadors. She's so strong there that it kind of overshadows that sympathetic bit. But you really get it by the end. Yeah, it almost brings to mind Perfect Mate, where Famke Janssen is bonded to Picard through a physiological, but she has to go off and do a duty.
Right.
But in Elaan's case here, in France Nuyen's case, you've got the beginning point, you've got the ending point. The tricky thing is in 1968 TV, how do you flip this? The MacGuffin are the tears, and now you've got Kirk going from the daddy figure who's making light of all this almost to the moony-eyed love boy, which is hard to do. It's a trope and a stereotype that Kirk has anyway, and they were aware of it then, much less as we've gone back and looked. We were just talking. I was watching the show thinking this is such a thankless job for both of them. The whole idea that the plot is going to turn on her tears, okay, fine. Even though I winced when I was a kid at that, and I kind of do now still, that turn, not the beginning spot and not the landing spot, but in the middle to make that work. Those initial moments are so uncomfortable. And there's times I was watching it thinking, I wonder if this could have been more deftly handled, but it was going to have to happen.
Two quick things. Thing one, I actually think The Perfect Mate is a far better executed version of this kind of a story. I like The Perfect Mate better.
20 years later? Gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Second thing is, I think her performance is good. I think the writing is frequently weak.
Yes.
And that's where the difference is.
That's what I was trying to get to. The both of them are doing what they can with what they've got to work with.
Well, and Larry, it's exactly where we're going to get to, the points that you're making. That's where it sort of falls short a bit.
Courtesy, remember?
Courtesy is not for inferiors.
Here's the thought that I had. I actually think, in a weird way, courtesy only matters towards inferiors. If you're dealing with a superior, you have to be courteous because your job is at stake. You're in a weaker power position. Your courtesy is forced by the relative status. Being courteous towards inferiors is where you show good character. It's when you don't have to do it. If being rude to inferiors is where you show poor character. That's where it exists, And by the way, watching people be rude to a waiter or someone who, at a store or something, that is the thing that makes me angrier than almost anything else in the world.
Well, that's right. That's why I hate Orwell ruined the term Big Brother, because now we all carry that around. But I just think in family situations, talk about taking the high road. If a big brother or an older, big sister is beating up or being mean to their little brother, little sister who are less mature, that's like the ultimate. It's like you have to take the high road if you're an older sibling even though they drive you crazy, you've got to. And then eventually the years melt away and you're all the same. But this is talking about cultures as well as individuals, ranks or military or whatever the power structure is. And then it extends to cultures too. And that's what, supposedly Starfleet and diplomacy and the Federation are all about. But yes, exactly. You've got to take the high road when you're the more developed or the more mature.
More powerful.
Yeah, the more powerful.
Needless to say, the courtesy pitch does not go over well with Dolman. She's not having any of it. And we hear that sensor ghost is moving closer. We head up to the bridge and we discover that it is a Klingon warship.
A Klingon warship designed by Matt Jeffries, who's of course a legend. And as we discussed in our season 3 preview, there was a whole deal set up between AMT, the model maker, and Paramount, or, in this case, the producers of Star Trek, in exchange for rights to the model. So AMT built the 24-inch Klingon battlecruiser model. Now, this episode aired, it was the second episode that aired during season 3. And then you have the Enterprise incident, which was the third episode that aired in season 3. And the Romulans were using Klingon design. But the Enterprise incident aired before Elaan of Troyius. So the first time people at home were watching Star Trek and they saw the Klingon battlecruiser, Scotty goes, "That's a Klingon ship." And then Spock goes, "Romulans are now using Klingon design." And people at home are like, "What?" So this is why it's better to watch these episodes in production order.
But by the way, I so remember as a kid, there was some moment as a kid where I can totally remember going, I don't understand. Like, what's happening here?
And I got to say, I just want to point out that when they do the big reveal of the Klingon battlecruiser, Fred Steiner's score, this was his 11th score for Star Trek. Fred Steiner, a legend. And I just loved his theme for the Klingon battlecruiser. His whole score in this episode is just fantastic. And say what you want about the third season, how the budget, really made things not as good and they had to cut corners and they kind of just were on their way out the door, like with Requiem for Methuselah. But the scores for season 3 are outstanding, and this one is included.
But right when this is going on, we hear that there's a disturbance in the Dolman's quarters. Kirk heads down, gets to the corridor, tries to get in. They say,
"Her glory has not summoned you."
Kirk is about to throw down when the door opens and Dolman says,
Crichton, remove that Trojan pig.
Lying there on his front with a knife in his back is Ambassador Petrie. And Kirk just kneels down and just goes, "Wow. This day sure went to hell, didn't it?" The ambassador's got a knife in his back. We're being trailed by a Klingon vessel. We've got this person on the Enterprise who was really making things difficult for me and my crew.
That is the end of Act 1. In Act 2, we're in sickbay. Ambassador Petrie has survived. He is a surly patient.
He's not happy.
and he's basically going, "Kirk, this is your fault. You made me go in there."
Ambassador, if Elasian women are that vicious, why are men so overwhelmingly attracted to them? I mean, what magic do they possess?
This is a total, I need you to give me some exposition.
Yes.
It's a total token major scene for Chapel is what it is.
Yeah.
A man whose flesh is once touched by the tears of a woman of Elas has his heart enslaved forever.
That's a tease.
Here you put me, Captain. Here I will stay. I have nothing further to say to you.
I felt more sympathy for Ambassador Petrie than I did for the Dohlman of Elas.
I don't know. I don't like either of them.
Well, he is the one with the knife hanging out. Yeah. By the way,
right.
I didn't realize watching it again, like, well, that's red blood out of him. I'm like, gosh, I wish that was like green so we could keep matching up. But then he would be confused for the Vulcan, Romulan, whatever. But anyway, his mint home green blood would have been.
Right. Back in the Dolman's quarters, she is tearing apart a green chicken with her hands and eating.
So, Ambassador Petrie is going to recover. That is too bad. You have delivered your message, now you may go.
And Kirk, with his lips poisoned with sarcasm, says,
Nothing would please me more, your glory, but your impetuous nature.
Your Trojan pig was here in my quarters without any permission, so I stabbed him. Just to be Trojan is enough.
The way that we see Elaan being depicted, she's eating with this like chicken, with her hands and just tearing off the meat from the bones. Kirk is treating her like a brat and a slob, basically, judging her for not using like utensils and everything like that.
And use a glass.
But guys, it made me think of the scene at the dinner table in Star Trek VI. When the Klingons are eating that like purple pasta with their fingers, and Uhura like looks at one of the Klingons as he's eating and judges him, but this is his culture. And then this Steve, this kind of goes back to that comment about how the Elasians are possessing and displaying some of the qualities that we will see developed in the Klingons.
I think it's exactly true. And basically what happens is that Kirk, says that now he's going to be her teacher. And she laughs and says, tell me, what can you teach me? And he says, and this is exactly what you were just talking about.
Table manners, for one thing. This is a plate. It contains food. This is a knife. It cuts the food. This is a glass.
Table manners are totally cultural. They're just manners. There are all sorts of places in the world that eat with their hands. That's completely normal we don't have to go to an alien planet to see people eating with their hands. In fact, there are a whole bunch of places where if you went there and you handed them something in your left hand, that would be unbelievably insulting. And that's not like a small percentage of the world. That's a lot of the world. India is the second most populous nation in the world. They largely eat with their hands. And so and the reason I think this is important is we talk about the Dolman as a savage. We are civilized. She is not civilized. And these words of civilized and savage have been used over and over by more powerful nations to be able to go in and do whatever the hell they want with less powerful people. From Native Americans, from British imperialism, it was always about, we got to civilize those savages. Guess what? That we're, this idea, we think these ideas are about
slavery. Excuse me.
Yes. And we think these are ideas about being more morally, ethically, culturally evolved, when a lot of them are table manners,
Well, you know what, Steve? It's really interesting because, like, there are two standout lines during the scene. One is when Kirk tells Elaan,
it's been my experience that the prejudices people feel about each other disappear when they get to know each other.
Which I think is a very, proactive. Yeah, that's very Star Trek-y.
Yeah.
But then in the same moment,
nobody's told you that you're an uncivilized savage, a vicious child in a woman's body, an arrogant monster.
So I did some research, and there is a book, Steve, that I think you'll find really interesting called Star Trek in History, Racing to a White Future. And racing is spelled race with a dash ing. So it is about race. And this is a 1998 book written by author Daniel Bernardi. And I just want to read you an excerpt. He goes, Elaan of Troyius brings into play stereotypes of the Asian female, the manipulative dragon lady, and the submissive female slave. Elaan is both irrational and primitive. She throws temper tantrums, eats with her hands, and drinks from the bottle. Kirk tells her that line, nobody's told you that you're an uncivilized savage, blah, blah, blah. And Captain Kirk is the white knight of Star Trek, who is articulating his and the Federation's moral superiority and authority over the Asian alien and her people through sexual conquest. It is only after the captain physically and sexually dominates her that she respects and eventually falls in love with him. Hello?
Well, first of all, Scott, I'm so glad you found that passage because I think, well, and I think this outlines to me one of the interesting things, and this is, I'm not saying this as a criticism of Star Trek, although I disagree with Kirk's behavior in a lot of this episode. Star Trek is where we were in the mid-60s. You know, the JFK, we are the spirit that is going to solve the problems of the world. We are going to spread American democracy, and we have figured this stuff out, and we're on this mission to do good. And that's where Star Trek was in the 60s. And in the post-Vietnam world, and in the post-Watergate world, and the post-Iran-Contra world, where we suddenly weren't feeling that good about ourselves, you get the Next Generation, where that's not the philosophy anymore. And I don't think it's not a criticism of the early Star Trek. It's more to me of this is how we were thinking then. And there's great things in it. And then this is what we learn as we move forward, you know?
Yeah, here's our blinders.
And this is one of them, is that there is a real cultural imperialism here. And Kirk thinks he knows what's right. And she slaps him and he slaps her back.
And boy, did NBC have a problem with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But they had a problem with it in the scripting phases. And the producers are basically like, just trust us, the way it's filmed, the way it plays out, you'll understand. Then they watch the final episode. They're like, we'll let it go.
It's an echo of McCoy and Eliane in Friday's Child.
Which sure.
Which to me is comedy. That's sarcasm. It's comedy. I've seen some lately, I guess, some feminist speakers really upset about the fact that McCoy slaps her. But she slapped him twice. So it's like, but it's very Looney Tunes, it's chopstick slapping.
And he gets up and starts to walk away, and she throws her knife at him and just misses.
And I want to say that scene, so somebody, I'm sure like some kind of stunt person or choreographer threw a knife, and that is Shatner. That's not a stunt person. You see a knife hit the wall, and William Shatner turns around. That is not some stunt double.
Well, it's probably not a real knife.
Right.
You don't need to, it's probably a rubber knife. But my question is, was she trying to kill him?
Well, she did try to kill Petrie. So why should she have any more respect or sympathy towards Kirk? I think she did try to kill him.
Well, here's what's part of it is that I think this is poorly written, but she is going to make a crazy turn to being attracted to Kirk very soon.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one reason I go, maybe she wasn't trying to kill him.
Maybe this is her weird warrior queen way of showing I like. When you would like junior high kids would punch each other when they liked each other in that weird kind of twisted.
Or maybe it's also a way of affection that Klingons have for each other.
Good point. Very good point.
To go back to that.
I love his last line.
Tomorrow's lesson will be on courtesy.
Down in engineering, our big guard Crichton is sneaking around. Already we know something's up. He pulls out some panel, something pops up. He's doing something. And then red guy walks up, sees Crichton, says, "What are you doing?" And he kills the red guy.
So he kills Watson, but don't worry, he'll be back in the way to Eden. So
surgically altered to appear.
So what Crichton is doing is he is sabotaging the dilithium crystal circuits, basically, and the crystals themselves. And the crystals, these little crystals, this one little panel that we see, that's driving all the Enterprise, the warp speed, the phasers, and the version of the dilithium crystal, is a whole room that we saw in the alternative factor. But I guess they, we don't need all this stuff. We only need a few crystals to drive the Enterprise. Nobody thought that, what happens if these little crystals?
That's the frontline crystal. That's like the crystal that's close to whatever. And then the back room was like all the reserve.
There you go.
Something, yeah.
I like that. I like that better.
Act 3, Kirk comes down to the Dolman's quarters. They won't let him in. He asks where Crichton is, and they say, on business.
Will you tell Her Glory that Captain Kirk requests the honor of a visit?
The Dolman has promised that I will be whipped to death if I let Captain Kirk pass through that door.
He tries to force his way in. They push him away, draw his weapons, and immediately get stunned because Spock is there.
Spock always saves the day.
So obviously this was set up. Kirk knew this was going to happen, told Spock to be there to stun them when things got rough.
Your analysis of the situation was flawless, anticipating that she would deny you admittance. However, the logic by which you arrived at your conclusion escapes me.
And his response.
Mr. Spock, the women on your planet are logical. That's the only planet in this galaxy that can make that claim.
Dude.
1968. Yeah.
Wait. What is that line that Nomad says about women? A mass of conflicting impulses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are some lines that are very, have not aged well, and that's one of them.
It's funny. Something has come up on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, a bunch, is there's a difference between having a character who is sexist and having the movie be sexist. This is an example of the whole stance of the show believes that this is funny. And not only believes it funny, but kind of believes it's true. That is definitely, we've hopefully moved past that particular kind of joke.
But this is an example of why now I hear it's good. Do we have other eyes, other ears? Younger generation, Mr. Scott. I hear younger people saying they wince watching the original series because they don't just take that in stride and say, "Oh yeah, well it was the '60s," and it's jarring.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure.
It's funny that we're talking about Taming of the Shrew because that is an example of a 17th century play that is really sad. I mean, there are two plays in Shakespeare that you always, if you're doing them, you got to make a choice of how you're going to do it. And one is Taming the Shrew, and the other is Merchant of Venice because of the anti-Semitism. And it's like it is what it is. That is what those plays are, and you have to kind of go. I don't think we throw out Shakespeare and I don't think we throw out Star Trek, but I think you have to look at them and go, okay, that's where that was when they did that.
Exactly.
He enters into her quarters. She immediately goes to stab him. He grabs her.
The penalty is death for what you are doing.
We're not on Elas. We're on my starship. I command here.
And she bites him, runs away, closes the door.
You are warned, Captain, never to touch me again.
If I touch you again, your glory, it'll be to administer an ancient Earth custom called a spanking, a form of punishment administered to spoiled brats.
So it's weird. I don't know quite how to phrase it. It's weird.
Well, as he's going to leave, so she suddenly has this moment of desperation where she exits the closet and says,
"There's one thing you can teach me."
No, you were right the first time. There's nothing I can teach you. There's nothing you do not know.
I don't know how to make people like me.
And you know what? Now that I think about it, I think you're right. I think when she threw the knife at Kirk, she did not want to kill him. I think she was already starting to feel something for him.
It was a cry for help, as they say.
Yes, it was a cry for help. And now she is literally crying for help, saying, how can I get people to like me? And this is the turning point in a lot of ways in this episode. This is where I like to call, if this was a film, I would call it the midpoint, because there's a change in her character, and there is a moment that we're about to see that changes Kirk, that changes the relationship between them. The entire scope of the episode goes off in a different direction. And it's a great moment. And it is the moment where I was watching and I went, wow, France Nuyen is really, really good. She's a terrific actor. And she really delivers a fully realized performance. So she is starting to cry. And Kirk definitely is now himself starting to feel sympathy. Like, oh, I guess I was too hard on you. So he moves his finger in to wipe. This is such a well-directed scene by John Meredyth Lucas. He goes to wipe away her tear, and the camera is right on her face. And as his finger wipes away the tear and he pulls his hand back, the look that the Dolman gives to Kirk with a very slight smile, that's what I've been calling in this episode the gotcha moment. Like, gotcha. And it immediately starts to take effect. These tears work fast, don't they?
You notice that. It's like everything else in medicines, antidotes, everything works fast.
Yeah, the medicines, the antidotes.
So, Scott, I think that was a fantastic description. I agree with everything you said. Here's my feeling about this, though. I don't believe this at all. I don't think this is earned. I believe the performances. I think it's well directed. I think her character turn at this moment, it comes out of nowhere as far as I'm concerned.
I understand.
It wasn't like, I mean, we can say that her throwing the knife, she missed on purpose because she was kind of into him, but that's not really in the show. You know what I mean? We're not seeing her look at him or see him with other people, and we're not seeing any attract. We're just seeing, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you.
First time you see that knife throw, you think she's gone for him. That she's going for his neck, back of his head.
Yeah, there's no moment that we see any attraction until this, and there's no moment that we go like, I want people to like me. I don't believe that from her at all. We haven't seen anything that shows that she has any of those feelings until this moment. So it comes out of nowhere. And this is what I would like to propose. They would never have done this in 1968. I think this episode would have been way better without tears. Is that actually have her be a cool person, have her do something cool, and have Kirk actually be attracted to her. You know, have classic romantic comedy where I hate you, and then we're thrown into a situation together, and now I am attracted to her, and that it's not fake attraction, but real attraction. That would have been a better episode. And she would have been a better character.
And that is a Steve Morris rewrite, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. There you go. That's why they pay me the big bucks.
I was in a production of we were talking about Taming the Shrew. I was in a production of Much Ado About Nothing with Beatrice and Benedict as the battle of the sexes going on.
Yeah.
And you had that same trope of them. It's the banter. It's like killer banter the whole way through. Right. And then at the end, it's like, oh, okay. You know, it's the opposite. It's the opposites attract thing. Now that wasn't going to happen here. Kirk had to stay married to Miss Enterprise, but like I said from the beginning, the pivot to get from A to C to B is just very 1968, and we're cutting budget, and we've got to do something in the middle and have it all make sense.
Yeah. But you're right; those cheers, they work real fast, and Kirk tries to fight it a little bit. And by the way, so the line, he mentioned a spanking earlier, and now that he's into her, she says,
Captain, that ancient Earth custom calls spanking. What is it?
Now, we're into a sexy area. It's a weird sexy area, but that's an area.
And guess what?
Something my 15-year-old self did not comprehend.
I didn't either. And watching this in production order and going like we've been doing on these deep dives, I have to say that this is definitely the most overt sexual relationship that we've seen in any episode of the original series up to this point. Of course, we're going to see that go a little further in Wink of an Eye, but they kiss. So here's the thing, Larry, especially for you, this whole idea, this legend, print the legend, that the first interracial kiss took place in Plato's Stepchildren between Kirk and Uhura, between Shatner and Nichelle Nichols. So if France Nuyen is of Vietnamese descent, doesn't that make this the first interracial kiss on TV?
I have seen, there's been so much, I'm going to say revisionism, but so many people have looked at, for one thing, we have people from around the Brits come in and say, oh no, there's, British soap operas and you talk about the first interracial kiss on TV, Americans saying that with our cultural blinders. So I know there are Brits that have 2 or 3 moments they come up with. People have come up with, it's Sammy Davis Jr. and I forget what singer.
Yeah, but it was 1962 or something, right?
Right. And it's a variety show and it was unscripted. But this is the one that people come back to. It really says a lot about how Americans in 68 and after, when we talk about race, we're talking black, white. We're talking about African-American and white Caucasian. Right. Not even, Hispanic. No, it's like, and she's, I think it's almost sad to say it's like Asian heritage cultures are so off the radar that they're not even showing up. I mean, when people say that, yes, because this was obviously filmed before Plato's Stepchildren and the famous interracial kiss. And whether or not you even want to take it away from Star Trek and go somewhere else, you've got this one before that one. So it's almost like the whole, the Stop Asian Hate movement. It's like the Asian population that talks about the crimes done against them. It's almost like they're off the radar, like they're not even in the conversation to have a grievance or to make change. And it's a thing that like I went right. Well, you go back to people saying Lucy and Desi. Well, he was Cuban, Hispanic. How many times did Lucy kiss Desi on I Love Lucy in the 50s?
Amazing point, for sure.
That's part of that. So technically, by our definitions, I think you would have to say that. But we love to have it being Shatner and Nichelle Nichols.
And we love it literally in black and white.
And there was a little bit of controversy around it at that point. Was there any controversy around this?
Nope. Not that I know of.
Here's the wonders of the internet, because I did a search. I went to Wikipedia and I was looking at interracial kisses, and they mentioned Lucy and Ricky and a couple of other ones. And then they mentioned on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1958, when a Canadian actor named William Shatner kissed France Nuyen when they were doing a piece from the world of Susie Wong on the Ed Sullivan Show in 58.
Man.
Which they would do. They would bring the Broadway shows across town they would do a scene or a song from,
And the other thing and this just shows, this would be an entire supplemental episode, but I actually have a lot of arguments of why there is in fact no such thing as race. Our construction of race is completely nonsensical. It's totally bizarre.
It's a power trip, right?
It's all like we've been talking about in this episode. It's all these things we've established culturally that we think are real. They are not, in fact, real. Not that they're not important, not that they don't have power, not that you can't be very proud of your race. And I'm not saying anything like that. But I am saying that we're constructing a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't actually make a lot of sense.
Which is why in Star Trek, we talk about Vulcans, Klingons, Andorians, Tellarites, and people talk about all the races of the Federation. I try to back up and say, all the species of the Federation.
Right.
Well, like there's that line in Plato's Stepchildren when Kirk says to Alexander, where I come from, race, color, size, makes no difference and no one has the power. That's a very Star Trek line.
Mm-hmm.
Uhura is trying to reach Kirk and can't reach him. It takes a little while. Finally, he does answer from the Dolman's quarters. Quick question. Did they have sex?
Absolutely. 100%, 1,000%, 100,000%. Absolutely, positively, yes.
Agreed.
The tears. Totally. It's all blame the tears.
Yeah.
However, you notice that when he rolls over to answer the thing, he's mostly clothed and she's mostly clothed for the 1968 censors. But yes.
But she is like lying on a bed behind him, and he's sitting on the bed.
But again, the way that she he says, "Oh, there's a signal coming from inside the Enterprise," and then you see her come up and put her arm around him, and it's like, has there been a scene like that before in Star Trek up to this point? No way.
Don't think so.
So Kirk manages to extricate himself. We go down to engineering. Scotty's kind of given a report. We've got Crichton captured. We find that he has some kind of transmitter, which Kirk recognizes as Klingon. We hear that this guy's neck was snapped, much like someone's neck was slapped in Journey to Babel.
Yep.
Captain, you must know I will tell you nothing. Our interrogation techniques are more excruciating than you are even capable of.
Yes, I'm aware you're trained to resist any form of physical torture.
And Kirk's like, yeah, hey, Spock, let's Vulcan 9-meld this guy.
Yeah.
And Crichton immediately kills himself.
Just like we had, an alien kill itself on the bridge of the Enterprise.
That's right.
In Journey to Babel.
Who was transmitting from inside the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Bam!
Yeah. Well, and this is like, this is where Star Trek is kind of reusing ideas that you kind of wish that they had other ideas. One thing I do think, by the way, is...
Twice in 80 hours? Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I love this plan, though, that we've sabotaged the warp engines and we're supposed to not know about them and we're going to blow up if we go to warp. I think that's a great bad guy plan.
And our hands are clean. Yes, as the Klingons, yeah.
Crichton was of a noble family. He loved me and wanted to marry me. He was furious when he heard of the announcement of the wedding plans.
Did she cry on him?
Did she cry on Crichton?
On Crichton.
Oh, that's a great question. Possibly.
My gut is no, but because he's having her killed right now.
Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. I'm going to say no because I would think that she would cry and let her tears be touched by someone she wanted to hook, and she did not have feelings for Crichton. So no, she did not. She did not cry on him.
It was one way.
Yeah.
But why speak of unimportant matters when we can speak about us?
And Kirk's like, no, there's a Klingon warship out there. And her response is, we should welcome their help. And this is where we get into the issue of duty.
An entire star system's stability depends on it. We have a duty to forget what happened.
Could you do that? Could you give me to another man?
My orders and yours say that you belong to another man.
It's really crazy, like Elan's plan, like her idea that she pitches to Kirk. Hey, how about we use the Enterprise to destroy Troyius? I mean, like, what is she thinking?
This whole thing of interplanetary, defense and diplomacy, she's new to it. So
Well, I like that. Look, I'm still totally into you, but that's a messed up plan. And then there's a buzzer on the door, which he doesn't respond to right away. She goes to kiss him just as that door opens, and there are a very judgmental looking Spock and McCoy.
I got to say that it's such an awkward moment, even after seeing this episode so many times, even though it's been a while. The door opens, and I still go, "Oh man, caught red-handed."
And when you got Spock and McCoy both standing in the door looking at you, like, what is it, obsession? Like, when the blue shirts come for you and you're the captain and it's those two, it's not going to be. When McCoy and Spock are united on something, it's,
Yeah, don't stand in their way.
Did she cry, Jim? What? Did she cry? Did her tears touch you at any time?
I love this storytelling, which is he doesn't answer the question. He looks at his hand.
He's been using that hand gesture through. It's almost like a little bit too much, but he totally uses that through the whole last fourth of the show. Yeah.
When the door opens and they, McCoy and Spock see Kirk with Elan, I was waiting for McCoy to say, "What is it with you anyway?"
Yeah.
Well, we're in trouble. Now listen, Jim. Petrie told Christine that the Elasian women have a sort of a biochemical substance in their tears that acts like a super love potion. And according to him, it doesn't wear off.
Bones, you've got to find me an antidote.
And just as this is happening, and this is where the episode I think is really good, they hear that the Klingons are coming in at warp speed.
All right, to head warp factor 2.
Captain, the antimatter...
Belay that order. What is it, Scotty?
The antimatter pods are rigged to blow up the moment we go into warp drive.
And that is the end of Act 3.
This last act, I have to say, Act 4 is just full of so much suspense. Act 4 is fantastic. The whole episode, I think, is very good, but Act 4 is very strong.
I had forgotten what a little strategic battle that was. And you know what? I'll say here's one place, like a small dose of Doomsday Machine. There's a place where the CGI battle choreography helps it out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Better than having just the D7 like flying by in profile. Right. the way the original airing was.
Laser crews, stand by to fire on command.
Klingons are coming in.
Hold your fire.
And the Klingon ship passes by.
They were trying to make us cut in warp drive. That way we'd have blown ourselves up and solved their problem for them without risking war with the Federation. Very neat.
And again, we have this question of why are the Klingons here? What are they interested in?
I have another question, Captain. Is not the bridge the wrong place for the Dolman at a time like this?
I'll be the judge.
Like he snaps at Spock, but catches himself.
Yes, you're quite right. Thank you, Mr. Spock.
Great subtle acting from Nimoy in observing this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes to her and tells her to go to the sick bay.
I want to be by your side.
Your presence here is interfering with my efficiency, my ability to protect you.
This is great. I really like where the episode, in Act 4, I agree. I think this is really working.
Would you have me wearing my wedding dress for another man and never see you again?
Yes, Elaan.
Are you happy at the prospect?
He says no.
And this is when we hear from Scotty that the entire dilithium panel is completely fused. It's not usable. We can't do anything. He says, well, can't you do something? He says, not without dilithium crystals. And this is where I go, why don't they carry some spares? Like,
yeah, for sure.
We should have a couple of extra crystals lying around. I know they're expensive, but it seems like they're a big deal.
Elaan, I have to go back to the bridge. Please, you must go to the sickbay.
And now Kirk's got to get it together. And I was thinking about how many times has Captain Kirk had to overcome his emotions to do his duty. Obviously, The Naked Time and The Enemy Within. In Dagger of the Mind, it's really similar. He has been forced to love somebody through means that are not natural, and he has to overcome that. In This Side of Paradise, he has to overcome the spores. City on the Edge of Forever, he has to let the woman he loves die. Private Little War, he's been infected by the whatever root, and he has to overcome that. Like, Kirk's been messed with a lot. you know?
For sure.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, this whole thing about the tears, I go back to the spores. I thought, oh, come on, Jamie boy, you've overcome the spores. You can overcome a little tear or two. Come on.
Yeah. Violent emotions. Where are those violent emotions when you need them?
Back on the bridge, the Klingon is ordering us to stand down and be boarded.
Scotty, what's our energy status?
93% of impulse power, sir.
We can still maneuver.
Maneuver? Aye. We can wallow like a garbage scow against a warp-driven starship.
A garbage scow is what they called the Enterprise in Trouble with Tribbles that made Scotty start a fight. And now the ambassador, it's very bizarre, but he's going to make one more move for his job and says,
Now that we are all about to die, I ask you once again to accept this necklace and to wear it as a token of respect for the desperate wishes of your people and mine for peace.
which makes no sense that he's doing this right now, but it's very important to the plot.
Because that necklace is going to save their lives.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you men of other world can speak of. Duty and responsibility.
I think they're kind of paying lip service to an arc where she comes to understand duty and responsibility. I don't think it's really in the script. I wish there was more of it, you know,
Sure.
but that's kind of what's going to happen. Kirk wants to stall for time. And in classic Kirk bluster, he says,
This is Captain James Kirk of the USS Enterprise on Federation business. Our mission is peaceful, but we're not prepared to accept any interference.
And then the Klingon captain appears.
The Klingon commander is played by K.L. Smith.
If that is indeed his real name.
Yeah, K.L. Smith.
And he just says,
Enterprise, prepare to be boarded or destroyed.
Scotty can't help. And in comes the Dolman again with the necklace. And we're trying to maneuver. We're trying to protect our shields. We're getting hit.
Getting some very peculiar energy readings.
And he walks over to Elaan and he's examining the necklace. She is the source.
What kind of jewels are in this?
They call them radiums. The necklace is supposed to bring you luck. It is of little value. They are common stones.
Like common stones.
Yeah, that's what you think.
Because, of course, these are dilithium crystals.
There is so much going on in this episode, and I know that some things are underwritten. Maybe elements of Elaan's character arc are underwritten. Maybe there's a little bit of a contrived exposition dump. But overall, I got to say that John Meredyth Lucas, as the writer and director of this episode, put a whole lot into it. And there is a lot of setup. There's a lot of dialogue that pays off towards the end of the episode. And now here you have that the necklace, which is made up of stones that are worthless to them, but are very, very valuable to the Federation and the Klingons. And hence, that is why you've got this conflict now with the Klingons, because they want those crystals.
Aha. Yeah.
Aha.
It is Deus Ex Machina. It's just, oh, here we have the solution to our problem. It's just sitting there, but it's okay.
Scotty, your estimate.
We're fitting it now, sir. But we'll have to run a few tests to make sure.
Tested in combat.
Captain, these are crude crystals. There is no way to judge what the unusual shapes will do to the energy flow.
And Kirk's having none of it. He's like, no, we're going to use these things.
Yep.
The Klingon is coming in.
Warp power to the shields, Captain.
Negative. His senses will pick up our power increase. The more helpless he thinks we are, the closer he'll come. As he passes, I want to cut in warp drive.
They're coming in closer. And just at the last moment, we go to warp true. We fire a full spread of photon torpedoes, and the Klingons take a serious hit.
Damage to Klingon number 3 shield, number 4 shield obliterated, loss of maneuver power.
Later, we're in the transporter room. Elaan enters.
You will not beam down for the ceremony.
No.
I want you to have this as a personal memento.
A knife. Yeah, a knife.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Remember me.
I have no choice.
Nor have I. I have only responsibilities and obligations.
Jerry Finnerman's cinematography at this moment, like the lighting on Kirk, is very signature Jerry Finnerman.
Yeah.
He's still with us in the beginning of season 3, and his cinematography is as much of a character as Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in the Enterprise.
What I do think is interesting is throughout all of the series up to this point, Kirk always chooses duty over love. And now the Dolman is choosing duty over love. and they energize. And I like that she closes her eyes right at the moment of transport.
It's a close-up on her face, and she's just about to cry, and the transporter beam takes her out, and that's the last image that we see of the Dohlman of Elas.
If she cries while being transported and the tears flow out through the energy, are we going to have a lot more people in love with her?
Oh, yeah.
Don't cry for me, oh my Dolman.
We're on the bridge.
I've isolated the biochemical substance of the Elasian tears. It's a kind of an infection, and I think I've found an antidote for
You're
it.
too late, Doctor. The captain has found his own antidote.
And of course he did, because just like we have said many times throughout this podcast, Steve Morris, who is Kirk's greatest love?
It's the Enterprise.
It is the Enterprise, going way back to the naked time. I give, she takes. No beach to walk on. Never lose you. Never. Kirk's greatest love is the Enterprise, and that is his cure. That's the cure that Kirk needed from the tears of Elan.
I know that that's what the episode is telling us, and I like Spock's line, the antidote to a woman of Elas is a starship.
The Enterprise infected the captain long before the Dolman did.
Does McCoy give him the shot anyway?
He should.
Oh, you think?
He should, because
if
just
McCoy
because
wants
Kirk
to
is...
get written up in a medical journal, he'd better.
Kirk literally just said, I have no, she says, remember me. He says, I have no choice. It's clearly still affecting him. And I remember at the end of Dagger of the Mind, where he'd been told that what's her name? I forget something about Christmas. Someone Noel.
Helen
That's
Noel.
what her name is.
Oh, Dr. Helen Noel.
Helen Noel.
And they say, and he's been programmed to be passionately in love with her. And at the very end of the episode, there's this moment where they say, but you're okay now. And he goes, yeah, I'm okay. But it's clear he's actually not okay.
Right.
That he's holding it in. This is the same thing. He just said, I have no choice but to ever forget you. Spock said that the Enterprise cured him. He is not cured. He is just keeping those emotions down. I hope that McCoy gives him the damn shot,
Forget. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the only
a mind
good
wipe is for only one significant other at a time. Yeah.
Well, I doubt seriously if there's any kind of an antidote for the Enterprise.
In this particular instance, Doctor, I agree with you.
So that's a Coonism, and we'll take it.
Yes. That's another one of those. It just still feels like the second season continued.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that is the end of Elaan of Troyius.
And France Nuyen certainly had a lot to say about Elaan of Troyius. Starting with her wardrobe, she said, my wardrobe for Elan was the most painful I ever wore. Every plate for her armor was glued to my skin, and after a while, the skin came off with it. Where we go through to make fantasy look real. But it must have been worth it. I am more known for my role on Star Trek than anything else I've done. I'm very grateful to have been asked to do a Star Trek. It's a timeless concept, and I feel grateful to the director, John Meredyth Lucas, who wrote this wonderful script called Elaan of Troyius. Speaking of John Meredyth Lucas, he said, I enjoyed the love story aspect of the show, and I thought it was an interesting change of pace. You didn't get to do too many of those.
This is definitely one of those episodes that the things I like. I like Act 4. I think the performances are good. There are definitely things that I go like, her transition is a little bit weak. And man, this idea of you are a savage and I am civilized and you must be, it is all just rubs me. The older I get, the more it rubs me the wrong way. And it does definitely point out a thing that I hope we're starting to learn to get past, which is just because I think this is the way you're supposed to do stuff doesn't actually mean that makes me civilized and you not civilized. That's sort of my final thoughts.
Well, I agree with those thoughts, but I got to say overall, I was really thrown by how strong this episode actually is. Again, due to John Meredyth Lucas writing and directing the episode, there's a lot going on here. Some elements have not dated well. Others have in terms of the filmmaking. I think it is a strong episode. They were 2 for 2 for the first 2 episodes they produced for season 3 of the original series. And I'm glad that I rewatched this again for Enterprise Incidents because it's one where I was able to rediscover the many strengths of it and appreciate it as a standout episode for season 3. Larry Nemechek, what is your overall summation for your thoughts of Elaan of Troyius?
Well, some of the problematical, both culturally and with regards to feminism and race that we were talking about earlier.
Hmm.
In abstention without watching it over the years, those kind of grew in my mind. And now I too think it came across as a much stronger, a more second season era episode than a third season. Oh, it's a total loss. In my mind, it had grown into being, farcical in ways it wasn't trying to be farcical.
Yeah.
Watching it again, I saw all the strengths seem stronger and the weaknesses didn't seem to be as strong as I'd let them creep into my mind over the years. I think the biggest problem overall was the structural pivot that it has to make with her, and that's still, it's just a Deus Machina. It's a MacGuffin there.
Yeah.
Not the Raiden stones, but the tears.
Right.
And whether you could have, finagled that and maybe knocked that down to be a little more sophisticated, a little more nuanced, probably could have happened. And we've seen it, like we said, Perfect Mate and other things. But I came away a little more respectful of the whole show overall, and watching the production quality they still put into it, despite the physical production. I had totally forgotten even that I knew it was Uhura's quarters. I didn't realize there were so many African accoutrements and art pieces in her room that are there, and things on the wall, and like an ancient African queen or princess kind of 2D thing on the wall. And I was like,
we're going to see her quarters
Mike
again.
Myers did that or something. What?
Yeah, we're going to see her quarters again in the Tholian web.
Right. But I felt like this was showing angles and more of it that even more than that. So good on that. This is also the episode that starts off with the cutscene where they were going to show the new rec center, and Spock was going to be playing on the lyre again, and have a little scene with the cast, and which the clips are out there. We can't do anything about the parts that are problematical now, but to me, watching it again, it didn't seem like the problematical bits raised as large as I was afraid they had without watching it. And it overall came across as a little bit stronger, even though there are some tropes, Star Trek tropes through it. If you lean on it as a Taming of the Shrew kind of physical body comedy with this layer of respectable Klingon intrigue over the top of it, it can still work. It's still in my middle batch, I think. There are far worse Star Trek episodes than this one.
Well, Larry Nemeczek, I cannot thank you enough for joining us for this conversation. It was above and beyond. And where can people find you, like on the internet, like your Facebook page or your Twitter handle or whatever?
Well, Larry Nemeczek on Twitter is good, and I'm on Twitter a lot. And then otherwise, all my other socials, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, Larry Nemeczek's Trekland is out there. And then just overall, LarryNemeczek.com.
And be sure to listen to the Trek Files, your podcast for Roddenberry Entertainment, which is a fantastic podcast.
Thank you, Scott. I like to think we do what you guys are doing, only like in little bite-sized pieces, which is frustrating, and it's a lot, but it's fun to dig into Gene's files. But I do my live stream Tuesdays at 1 on all my channels, and then I have the Portal 47, which is a backstage deep dive with people and guests. And then my Trekland Treks, which is something that's just exploded the last 2 or 3 years, going to locations, is either individual tours, custom made, or on special events. So, but that's all on my site. So I invite everybody to come over and check it out.
And if people want to check out Enterprise Incidents on social media, the most action is on our Facebook page. Check us out there. You can follow us on Twitter at Enter Incidents, on Instagram at Enterprise Incidents. You can support the show by looking at the show notes and going to Anchor. There's a link right there, and you can subscribe to the show for as little as 99 cents a month. We think of it as a tip jar. And also, we'd love you to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, where you would definitely want to leave a review, or go on YouTube. You can subscribe there too and leave your comments there. Scott, how would people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at MovieMance, and be sure to share Enterprise Incidents on your social media platforms. We have a very, very strong following, but we really do need to get the word out about Enterprise Incidents. So please hook us up and share Enterprise Incidents. Get the word out there, because we've been getting such great reactions, especially on Apple Podcasts, where people are leaving great reviews of Enterprise Incidents. On our Facebook page, which is also, of course, Enterprise Incidents. We just got to get a bigger audience. I know there's like 600 Star Trek podcasts, but we really are proud of what we are contributing. So anything you can do to help get the word out would be great. Steve, what can people listen to on the Cinephiles that goes along with Elaan of Troyius?
Well, I was thinking this is sort of a doomed love story, and we've covered some other doomed love stories on the Cinephiles. For instance, Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, David Lean's incredibly romantic film Brief Encounter, and one of the most moving doomed love stories I can think of, which is the Merchant and Ivory film The Remains of the Day. And if you want to follow me, SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris on 1 on Instagram. Scott, where's the crew of the Enterprise going next?
Well, this next episode is a really, really special, unique episode. We are going back to paradise, not this side of paradise, but the next episode of Enterprise Incidents. We are headed to the Paradise Syndrome, a beautiful, unique, powerful episode, one of the best of the third season. So please join us for the next episode of Enterprise Incidents on the Paradise Syndrome. And until then, keep going boldly.